to welcome John McLennan, our archivist, who's going to talk about a murder in Maylands. The first talk he did, actually, when I first met him, was about a murder. He loves murders, and hopefully they get people's attention. So, John, welcome, and I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. There we go. A quick wetting of the throat while you have a quiet read. 1882, they were talking about using electricity, but there was a possibility that gas would be the preferred power source. Right. I have no idea who Professor Sylvester was, but he gave a demonstration of his gas. And everyone was quite impressed with it. But there was knowledge of the electrical fluid that was going around in the Northern Hemisphere, and some forward-looking people wanted electricity. However, the council was doing its due diligence, and the mayor had been in contact with an English electric light company, and it was looking as though electricity was going to be cheaper than gas. Nevertheless, by September 1882, the Perth Gas Company was laying pipes in Hay Street. A Mr. Wigglesworth had come out from England, I think from Durham in England, and he was the engineer for the Perth Gas Company. He'd recently arrived from England on the Bonington with his wife and 6 children. His daughter Nellie became quite the favourite of the musical entertainment set, singing in numerous concerts to universal acclaim. But here he is, he wants a gas holder tank built. And where was it? Well, there's Wellington Street, there's Lord Street. I think you recognise that corner on Lord Street. And well, I've got one of these things here. There is the gas holder tank. This was a photo taken in 1885, looking northeast. The full photograph shows Lord Street going miles off into the distance. It's quite an interesting image if you can track it down. It's held by the State Library. Over the next few years there was a fair amount of discussion, and Perth lived up to its wait a while name. Other colonies and cities around the world experimented with and moved on to lighting with the new wonder fluid, electricity. In June 1886, an international marionette show came to Perth and performed at the town hall. One of the scenes was illuminated by the electric light. During the next year, electric lights were added to a number of vessels on the West Australian coast, and the public was beginning to appreciate the benefits of night lighting. By August 1887, electric lighting had reached some buildings in Adelaide. However, the Fremantle City Council was still using gas lighting in 1889. By April 1890, there were plans to float a second gas company in Perth to use coal from the Collie River. And there was word that the Perth Electric Lighting Company was being floated in London. In May 1891, the West Australian Electric Light and Power Company was floated with a capital of £20,000. Its directors had familiar names: the Honourable J.A. Wright, MLC, Mr A.Y. Hassell, MLA, yes, he was an ancestor of our previous mayor, Premier, Mr T. Quinlan, MLA, and Messrs M.C. Davis, W.G. Knight. For the cricketers, H.S. Darlow was there. For the footballers, W. Sandover was there. And they were all directors. So that was successfully floated. Just before this announcement, Mr E. Wigglesworth, engineer and manager of the Perth Gas Works, wrote a letter to the Daily News in which he explained his experience in England where gas lighting was cheaper than electric lighting. He also explained that the population of Perth was not large enough for both. This letter raised an outcry among other letter writers. There we go. And their missives were published for the next month. At the beginning of July, the Perth Gas Company held its AGM and the chairman, in reply to a question, commented that the board had recognised the importance of the subject and they would endeavour always to keep the company in as sound a position as it was at the present time. So here we've got the gas company trying to stick with gas, Wigglesworth saying gas was cheaper. In December, it was announced that a Mr G. Ottey of the Perth Electric Lighting Company would be lighting the next session of the government. Electrical momentum was gathering pace. At the December meeting of the Perth City Council, Councillor Haynes moved that the lighting of Perth be looked into by way of tenders. In the meantime, the Perth Gas Company was gearing up to beat any opposition, and Edward Wigglesworth was sent east to get it organised. And then in December 1891, it was finally decided to purchase and erect machinery for the purpose of electric lighting. In March of 1892, the Legislative Assembly began to prepare the way for the regulation of electricity supply by cities and roads boards. Then in August of that year, Mr Wigglesworth, noted promoter of gas in the colony, suddenly discovered that he could get a good electric power plant from England for under £1,500. One wonders which bank he was on the road to when he had this dramatic conversion. Charles Harper, chairman of the Perth Electric Light and Power Company, was moved to the right to the West Australian. As you can see, Mr Wigglesworth has taken infinite pains for some time past to assure the public that in his opinion the electric light is expensive, inefficient and dangerous. So much so, indeed, that he asked only a short time since to be given the power to prevent its use in Perth for 5 years. Yes. So Perth was divided into the gas and electric factions. Hang on, I've gone ahead too far there. Let me go back. Perth was divided into the gas and electric factions in a bitter dispute fuelled by the exploitation the citizenry felt the gas company had inflicted on the city. Then in September of 1892, the Legislative Assembly announced that they were amending the Perth Gas Companies Act to allow them to supply electricity as well. Following his trip to Melbourne, Wigglesworth opened correspondence with J.H. Holmes and Co. of Newcastle on Tyne and was able to purchase 4 of their Castle dynamos of the shunt type, coupled direct to 4 of Williams' engines, all technical stuff which they knew about in those days. Each of these engines runs at a speed of 460 revolutions a minute and develops 80 indicated horsepower. Holmes and Co. also sent out an engineer, Herbert Broadbent, to install and run the machinery. By 1897, the Perth Gas Company was able to officially open the electric network in Perth. The firm was now making the company a plant for a capacity of 4,800 lamps of 8 candle power. With boilers, engines, dynamos and switchboards, the whole thing. The new machinery would not be erected on the old site, but on a piece of land on the opposite side of Lord Street. An extensive shed measuring 99 feet by 40 feet would be put up and a large chimney stack built. The rest of the plant would come by steamer and be accompanied by Mr. Broadbent. The extra plant was intended more for private than for street lighting at present. Then there was the formal opening. And there were a whole pile of people present there, including, we'll hear of him more soon, Mr. Wall of Messrs. Splatt, Wall and Harrison, an electrical firm. We'll hear more of him soon. There was also Mr. C. Worm, representative of the Edison Swan Electric Light Company. We know about the 4 Castle dynamos of the shunt type. These were basically ship's engines. They'd made 1,500 of these engines, most of which were installed in steamships. We had 4 of them sitting here on dry land. And there's a good, strong article in the West Australian Time of 1897, July 1987. And it finishes off, during the evening, an electrical novelty in the shape of Edison's new bicycle lamp was shown by Mr. Wern, and it attracted much attention and admiration on the part of the electricians present. So there's a lot of electrical stuff going on. It's time to introduce some more characters to this tale. Born in 1871 in Mossley, Lancashire, England, to solicitor William Broadbent and his wife Hannah Williamson of Ashton-under-Lyne, Lancashire, Arthur was the youngest of 3 sons. The second youngest was named Herbert. Attracted to the new wonder of the age, electricity, the brothers moved to Newcastle in Northumberland, where the 2 youngest began working for the engineering firm of J.H. Holmes & Co. The youngest, Alfred, married a Christiana Hogg in Newcastle, and he and his family followed Herbert out to Western Australia, although he did have a short detour, firstly leaving the boat in Melbourne before returning to Perth, or before coming to Perth in 1896 with Herbert on board the SS Berksgate. Now for a little recreation and family time. In 1892, a Dr. G.R. Broadbent was the champion cyclist in Melbourne, and in the early 1900s was the chief handicapper for road races in Victoria. I can find no connection with the Broadbents of Perth. However, there must have been a reason for Alfred to stop off in Melbourne. I don't know. 98, both Herbert Broadbent and Edward Wigglesworth were involved as officials in bike racing in Perth. So that's interesting, but no connection. 1899, in May, Ethel Broadbent, the youngest daughter of the solicitor, William Broadbent, married L.J.B. Wall from Messrs. Splatt, Wall and Harrison. So that's all in the family. The reception was held at the house of the bride's parents in Wellington Street, and after the usual toasts had been duly honoured, the newly married couple left Perth for their honeymoon. The presents were numerous and costly. In 1903, William Broadbent, the father, died. He had I missed that one, there we go. The death of the city solicitor, typhoid fever. The family was very heavily involved in electricity and its technical side. He was the father of Herbert Broadbent of the Perth Gas Company and of Mr. A. Broadbent, another engineer connected with the same company. Another son is Frank Broadbent, consulting engineer of London. He was also father-in-law to Mr. L.J.B. Wall of this city, Mr. Arthur Allen, sub-editor of the Electrical Review in London, and Mr Percy Reid, Assistant Superintendent of Telegraphs Transvaal, South Africa. He was also chairman of the Trinity Church Young Men's Bible Class. He died at 5 p.m. yesterday at the age of 63 years. Following year, Miss Ethel Wigglesworth, youngest daughter of Mr and Mrs Edward Wigglesworth of Perth, married Mr Herbert Broadbent, second son of the late Mr William Broadbent. Again, it's all in the family. About 1908, the Perth Gas Company built an electric powerhouse in Ferguson Street, Maylands. Butterway. The only reference I can find to it is in the post office directories, which have been digitised by the State Library. In 1910, Edward's son, Robert Wigglesworth, died. Then in 1912, Lewis Wall of Messrs Splatt, Wall and I love that name, Splatt, Wall and Harrison, and brother-in-law to the Broadbents, died in Peppermint Grove, aged 42. So the past 2 decades have been quiet, with the normal family life of marriages, births, deaths, recreation and enjoyment of life. Then on the 10th of September 1914, rumours of meter tickling came to Herbert Broadbent's attention, and he made an official complaint to the police. The police, probably recognising that Herbert was the best available expert in electrical matters, deputised him to investigate the matter. The following morning, Herbert commenced investigative arrangements with his brother Arthur. The results were sudden and unexpected. That evening, a Friday night, Arthur had done his normal inspection of the Maylands powerhouse in Ferguson Street and was walking back to the Maylands railway station to catch the 8:45 train back into Perth. He actually lived in West Perth. As he reached the intersection of 9th Avenue and Railway Terrace, 130 metres that way, a man stepped away from the electric light pole and with a revolver shot Arthur in the back. Saturday papers told the story. Sensation at Maylands, municipal engineer shot, his assailant unknown. He lingered for a fortnight. He was paralysed because the bullet had gone through the spine and still lodged in his body. However, on the 25th of September, the inevitable happened. The death of Mr A.D. Broadbent, and there's by now a mysterious man in an overcoat. The bullet recovered is of a .32 calibre and was fired from a revolver, the variety of which has not yet been determined. The fact that it is a revolver bullet which did the damage strengthens the theory of foul play. From remarks he let fall immediately after the shooting, there is no doubt that he was firmly convinced that he was deliberately shot. Just after the shooting, one of the first to rush to the assistance of the injured man was Mr Ben Wallish, a newsagent. Mr Wallish said to Mr Broadbent as he lifted him up, "You don't appear to be shot." Mr Broadbent replied, "Oh yes, I'm shot all right." He then added after a brief pause, "Wasn't it cowardly to shoot a man in the back? They might have come in front of me." Mr Wallish said, "Do you know who shot you?" And the wounded man replied, "No, I haven't the faintest idea." The individual the detectives are anxious to get hold of is a man who, wearing an overcoat, was last seen within a few yards of where the shooting took place, and who must have seen the shooting, if he was not the actual culprit himself. Suspicion points very strongly to this man with the overcoat. Shortly before the report, a young lady saw this individual standing near a tree guard, and thinking he was a young man with whom she had an appointment, she walked up close to him. When he turned towards the tree, and hid his face in the coat. A couple of minutes before the shooting took place, this same man was seen on the other side of the road within a few yards of where the shooting took place. And immediately after the dastardly deed, he was seen running away. We are making these facts public at this stage because the detectives are convinced that their best auxiliary in the inquiry will be the greatest publicity. The crime has been committed, the murder has yet to be avenged. No progress was made on the murder. However, on the 16th of October, 3 weeks later, this article appeared in the Daily News. Electrician arrested, systematic fraud alleged. This is the meter tickling that this is the meter tickling which Alfred and Herbert were involved with trying to find out who was doing it prior to the murder. Arthur Rapley. He'd come over to Western Australia in the early 1900s. He was an electrician. He was now fairly high up in the electric department of the Perth City Council. But nothing to tie him with the murder. It was just something that happened out of the blue. The charge was amended slightly, and between January the 1st, 1913 and September the 11th, 1914, that he conspired with John James Stacey and Patrick McAvoy to cheat and defraud the municipality of Perth of large sums of money by fraudulently altering the index to certain meters and wilfully preventing proper records being made. Sir Walter James, for the prosecution, while not opposing a renewal of bail, said that Rapley had been interfering with and threatening one of the witnesses. He asked His Worship to issue a warning against a repetition of such conduct. The PM, who was Mr. Rowe, "If it comes to my knowledge that such a thing is occurring, I will be obliged to refuse bail. In the event, you will be detained in custody until your case is heard." Rapley, I don't know who the witnesses are. Sir Walter James, the prosecutor, said he had previously mentioned that Rapley had made threats against a witness. He now had in his possession a letter to one of the witnesses from another man who said that Rapley stated if he found out the man who first gave information against him, he would put a bullet in him. Mr. Rowe, the magistrate, chose to withhold bail. Then, in November, a week later, the committal hearing. And the key part of it, Mr. John James Stacey, one of the co-defendants, aged 26, said he had been employed at the work for 8 or 9 years. Rapley was his immediate superior, and it was from him that he took his instructions. In June last, he was sent to Queen's Hall. Now, Queen's Hall was a big building in William Street, next to the Wesley church lands. It was a big hall, and it was showing these modern things called moving pictures, which required a lot of electricity and lighting and all that sort of stuff. So he was sent to Queen's Hall to overhaul the wiring and the meters. To do this, it was necessary to break the seals at the top of the meters. Those seals were affixed by the fitters. These he resealed with number 8 pliers, whatever they were, which were used only by him except under orders. Stacey said as he was about to leave, he met Rapley, who asked him what he'd found. Witness told him what they'd done and then asked, "Do you know anything about Queen's Hall?" To which the accused replied, "No." He, Stacey, then said, "There must be something wrong, else we would not have been sent around." Witness said he asked Rapley, "Are you tickling the meters at the Queen's?" After a while, Rapley said, "Yes, I'm tickling the meters." Witness said, "If you don't drop this game, it will drop you shortly. What are you getting out of it?" Accused replied, 30 shillings a month. "You can come halves if you like. I only want to keep it up for another 3 or 6 months. I have a number of trees up at Newshay I haven't quite paid for yet." Stacey was asked at the time of this conversation, Mr Arthur Broadbent was carrying on some special investigations. Did Rapley know this? "Yes, I heard he said on one occasion that he, Broadbent, was stirring up the mud." Then Sir Walter James asked, "How long did you use your pliers?" "Until September the 11th, the day Arthur Broadbent was shot." Mr Jackson, counsel appearing for Rapley, in consequence of the references made in this case to the date of the death of Mr Arthur Broadbent, I should like my learned friend to say he is making absolutely no insinuation against the accused. Sir Walter James commented, "I've only been referring to the death for fixing dates, and for that purpose only. I have no evidence before me, as counsel, to suggest that Mr Rapley was connected with the murder." The evidence being concluded, accused who reserved his defence was committed for trial at the December sittings of the Criminal Court in Perth. The day before sentencing, the Sun newspaper in Kalgoorlie published this article. "If it wasn't for the war, Perth would be seething with excitement respecting the meter tickling case, in which Arthur Rapley, Chief Light Inspector, is charged with having defrauded the City Council. The evidence has been sensational in the extreme. If the Crown witnesses are to be believed, the Council has been systematically defrauded by an ingenious process of interfering with the meters. And among those who have alleged to have benefited is a well-known moving picture enterprise. Apropos of nothing," the article goes on, "the man who discovered the hanky-panky business and who was most relentless in pursuit of misdemeanors," love that word, misdemeanors, "was murdered in cold blood at Maylands one night, and his assassin has never been discovered. The case, in fact, contains all the elements of a first-class gunman tragedy. What a story the New York papers would make of it." So he went to trial, he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. "4 years with hard labour. So he's off in Fremantle Jail. In 1915, Hannah Broadbent, Alfred and Herbert's mother, died. And this is the only photograph of any of the protagonists I've been able to find. This is Mr Herbert Broadbent. Later that year, Herbert, together with his family, moved to Melbourne. He gave up here as in charge of the Perth City Council Gas and Electricity Board. He headed off to Melbourne. No, I still haven't found a connection between the Broadbents of Perth and the cycling Broadbents of Melbourne. I do wonder if the move had a touch of fear in it, despite the apparent murder of his brother being in Fremantle prison. The widowed Christiana and her children remained in Perth. In 1918, Rapley was released from Fremantle a changed man. No, I was joking, not really. Yesterday, accompanied by Detectives Muller and Cole, Arthur Rapley, a resident lately of Guildford Road, Mount Lawley, and a little over 3 years ago an electrician in the employ of the City Council, joined him Newshade on the Midland Railway line. After executing a search warrant at a house about 6 miles on the Chittering Road, which is being built by Rapley, the detectives arrested him on warrant, charging him with stealing and receiving property to the value of £11, belonging to Marcus Wilkins and timber merchant of 61 Guildford Road, Mount Lawley. Rapley was brought to the city, lodged at the lock-up. The case recalls the recollections of the famous meter tickling business in Perth. He was sentenced to another 3 months of jail time. There was a final mention of these events in 1938, when the well-known rag, the Mirror, published a story based on the words of an anonymous person. The Mirror was informed by a man who claimed to know the circumstances of the shooting, that the bullet was meant for someone else, and that there was a girl involved. Or was this a final attempt by an ageing Rapley to clear his name? We shall never know. And so the story ends. As always in real life, no one lives happily ever after, and on the 1st of December 1941, 3 years after this article, Arthur Rapley died in Midland. In May 1945, Herbert died in St Kilda in Melbourne. And finally, on October the 25th, 1954, the widowed Christiana Broadbent died in Belmont. She had not remarried and was a great-grandmother. Thank you. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Dead silence.
I'd like to make some comments. I experienced John researching this, and he started from a murder. He did his, as I said before, his first talk was about a murder. And I think ever since he's been looking for a murder. And he found one in a couple of those articles towards the end there. But hearing John researching forward and back through Trove, any connection with regard to any of those people, and putting it together, wow. And the excitement when he's found something and it all goes together.
It's all good fun.
Absolutely. So we took about investigations and detective work and all that sort of thing, putting it all together, and having the ability to search through Trove, to have the ability to go through those things and bring those out. He's done that before with various pursuits that he's had with regard to finding out the histories of people. As long as he knows their name, a few little points, put it all together. It's amazing that all that information's there. And thank you, John, for actually bringing that out. And I think it would make a good movie, actually. Really, really good.
Yeah. But what I really found interesting, the murder was fun. Not for the victim, of course, but fun to look at from the outside and to actually see, be able to see a probable. I can't go any further than that because there are descendants of Mr. Rapley in Perth. There are descendants of Arthur Broadbent in Perth. So I can't say anything definitive, but boy, it certainly looks like it, doesn't it?
We've got a cold case review, John.
Yes, we'll have to dig Mr. Rapley up and interview him again.
Was that normal for you for a murder?
No, he wasn't. He was never charged with murder. That was simply meter tickling. It was only meter tickling. They could not pin the murder on him at all.
It's a little bit like Al Capone. He might have killed a whole lot of people. What they got him was for tax evasion.
Yeah.
So they get him in the end.
Yep. And then once he got out, they got him again.
John, when did they, in that story that you showed us at the end,
Yep.
you said that the bullet was really meant for somebody else. Did they ever say who that?
Totally anonymous, no names, no pack drill, nothing. It was just I feel it was either an attempt by someone clear Rapley's name of any lingering suspicion, or it was just a filler made up by the paper. Because don't forget, they didn't have computers and all that sort of stuff. They would have just had, it could have been a reporter coming across the story in an old newspaper and blowing it up.
There was no definite confession by Rapley?
No, nothing at all. Anything
If
else?
there's no more questions, I'd like to thank John.
Oh. Thank you.